There was always some startups that kind of fell out of that bucket. We've already raised a seed round. We're beyond that stage. Our board wouldn't let us do that anyway. And at the same time, corporations, the company's only 6 months old. We're going to track them for like the next 12 months. And like morons, we kept bringing them these cutting edge startups. But all of a sudden then it clicked. We got supply and we had demand. And the only thing that was preventing us from putting them together was A, the program we ran, and B, how we charged for it. So like, okay, F that. We'll just throw those out the window and start from scratch. We had supply and we had demand.
Imagine you're running one of the top 5 programs of your kind in the entire world. You have the prestige, the history, and the brand recognition, but you realize that despite that success, you're actually stuck. You're competing against giants with more resources and more scale. And you can see a gradual decline on the horizon if you keep doing things the traditional way. Our guest today faced that exact existential crisis. He was handed a blank sheet of paper and asked, if you can't be number one where you are, where can you be number one? By turning the problem on its side and making a bold move away from his original core service, he didn't just survive, he redefined an entire industry category and secured a new path to the top. Welcome to today's episode of Your Business Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Shapiro, author of Your Business Growth Playbook, and my guest today is Andrew Ackerman. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Oh, that was an awesome intro. I'm excited to hear the show now.
Love it. So, Andrew, take us back in time. How did you get your first start in this whole world of startups and transition from being like a founding COO to an early stage investor?
Sure. Okay. We got to go back to like this era called the 90s, right? In the 90s, if you remember them, like there were things like Netscape Navigator where you could get like government data online, but there was none of the internet as we know it, just like the glimmerings of it. And as the 90s drew to a close, all of a sudden things started to become possible. And I said, I'm quitting my consulting job. I'm coming back to New York. And I ended up in my first startup, a startup called Bunk, which worked with summer camps so that the parents of the campers in camp could go see pictures of their kids at camp, send them messages. I mean, stuff that to us now feels kind of trivial, but then was groundbreaking stuff.
So what was the primary gap in the summer camp industry that led you to build a whole web services leader from scratch over that period of 8 years?
Sure. So the great insights seem almost trivial in retrospect, but here was a group of parents that were sending their kids away, sometimes for 8 weeks at a time, and not going to see or hear other than maybe a phone call once a week from their kids. Now, our parents, like, that was great. See you, we're going to Europe, right? But this generation, a little more hovering, a little more helicoptery, and in their work and other world, we're getting used to seeing photos of stuff taking place around them from friends halfway around the world. And it was becoming almost intolerable to them that they couldn't see, their kids playing at the pool or at archery. But in that same environment, you had the camp directors who were probably in rural areas with bad connections, not tech savvy at all, and also had to worry about other things like security, like what happens if somebody uses this information to pretend to be an uncle, or, to do unsavory things in like his dank basement when he's looking at pictures of kids at the pool. So as a director, you had parents kind of banging at your door, I want to see these photos. And you had all these fears at the same time, and tech just wasn't there for you.
So what did that early growth feel like when you realized like you were successfully transitioning this traditional services into the digital world? You've mentioned your ideal customer wasn't that tech savvy. How did you help the businesses move in that direction?
Oh my God. You want to talk about not tech savvy? I had one parent yell at me that the site was down and it wasn't working. First of all, this was the era of AOL. So it was like, not that AOL bar, the actual address bar. Turned out the guy was typing bunkl.com, not Bunk One. Right? It took me like an hour to figure out what he was doing wrong. Sorry, but I digress. The main thing is you got to speak the director's languages, or your customer's languages. And that was actually one of the hardest things for us to do because we knew what we were doing. Like here we are, like these fresh-faced kids. We show up at these like camp conferences. We got our booth, by the way, in front of the booth, never behind the booth, right? You always want to intercept people when they're walking down the aisle. And then you got these camp directors who are there and they're buying everything from like lake toys to like soy versions of peanut butter. And we're there saying, hey, you got a website. And we're thinking, great, we're going to get a customer. And like, yeah, we got one, see you. And of course, their website at that point, this is 2000, it's like 3 pages as a brochure. It wasn't anything like what we had, but like we couldn't get out of the, oh, that's my problem solved, I need to go get fake peanut butter, like mindset, until it came to us and we just said, oh, but do you have a password protected photo gallery? And like, oh, no, I don't. And that actually connected it not with, I got my brochure online, but, oh, these parents are banging on my door, I don't have that. And then you saw them stop, turn around and come back to the booth. And that was our first breakthrough, right? Until we had that, there was a lot of banging your head against the wall. But once we found that, even though it was only part of what we did, like that was the marketing hook. That was the first time we really felt like not only do we have something great to sell, but we can actually sell it.
Yeah, if I can just dive into that, what I'm hearing you say is you had a product and you knew your market, but the messaging wasn't dialed in. So it wasn't about building a better product or changing your market. You simply adjusted the messaging, and that's what got that person who was walking away from your booth to turn around, come back, and actually engage in the conversation.
Exactly. It's like you start off with, hey, it's not working. And then there's a couple of reasons it might not work. You could have a bad product or you could have a bad marketing message, just to like oversimplify. And we knew we had the right product, but until we found that right marketing message, it still wasn't going to get past the, see, I already got that.
One of the things one of the frameworks I often talk about with clients is this idea of like, you need 3 things in your business, right? You need your product, your people who are going to buy it, and your way to sell that thing to those people. And you can have a business with only one of those. And many successful businesses only have one of those. 2 is better, but when you have all 3, now you're firing on all cylinders. And so I love that you knew who that market was, you knew what it was to sell, and you simply just dialed in that sales process and the messaging, and we were able to convert.
Yeah, I mean, it's night and day once you get all 3 of them.
We could talk about Bunk One at length, and I love a lot of the stories you and I have talked about from that period. But where I really want us to go is your entry into the venture and accelerator world. So tell us about your move from the startup, what happened after that, and how you got into venture.
I wandered around a little bit, and that's okay, right? Sometimes you end up with the coolest sets of skills when your path isn't entirely linear. So I went, there I am. It's 8 years at my startup. I'm really heads down. Got to make this thing work. And then when I get bought out, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, what do I do next? Right? It wasn't like retire, buy a boat, never work again money. So I really did have to work. But I hadn't spent like that last year building my personal brand, networking, preparing the way. So by just blind luck, I ended up getting a job at a family office. And for those of your audience who are not quite sure what that is, that's basically either a family or an individual, high net worth, a lot of money, and he needs someone else to help him invest it. And, in some cases also donate it. This was one of the smaller ones. It was just me managing all that. It was an interesting experience. It wasn't where I wanted to be long term. But what I learned was, okay, I'm here. I got to be thinking about where I want to be in a year or two. So I used part of that time very consciously to raise my profile in the startup community, not just as someone who had done it, but someone who people knew had done it. And I had the opportunity about a year and a half in. It was a friend of mine who was starting up a publication called Alley Watch. It was a newsletter, all just everything startups in Silicon Alley in New York. And she, I wish her the best of luck. I was like, Bonnie, let me know how I can help. And Bonnie says, Bonnie's about like 4'11". She's like, you will write for Alley Watch. And I said, okay, I'll write an article for Alley Watch. I like writing. She's like, no, you will write a column. Now, I've done a lot of dumb things in my life, and I've done some smart things. It's very rare that I've done something smart, and at the time I realized I was being smart. This was one of them. Instead of saying, F you, Bonnie, I have a day job, right? I'm not going to write for you for free. I said, oh, let me think about it. All right. So, and when I thought about it was this, I said, I need to raise my profile. I also don't have infinite amount of time. So what could I do here that I could time box efficiently, but still get these benefits so that, I'm getting out not only what I've done, but now people know what I've done. So I hit on the idea of interviewing other angel investors. Now this is back in like 2011 or so, 2012. AngelList wasn't the thing. If you were an angel investor, you were, just talking to people to find deals. And if you were a startup looking for angels, you were just talking to people like, who do you know? So here I am. I figure I'm going to ask the same 10, 15 questions to all these angels. And I know a lot of them. They're my world. And I'll spend an hour doing the interview and an hour writing it up. And boom, once a month for 2 hours, I have this stream of content that no one else is doing. It had to be something that no one else was writing, because otherwise, why would I want to read it, much less write it? So once I had figured out, okay, I can do this, and that's a meaningful amount of time, it's a manageable amount of time, I said, okay, Bonnie, I got this idea. She says, awesome, run with it. And I will tell you with zero doubt that when I came to apply to Dream It, that's one of the things that put me over the top. Because I know the other two guys that were interviewing for my role. They're great guys. I know what roles they have because I interviewed for those other roles too. But the fact that I could not only say, yeah, I know a lot of angels, but like I had that to point to, right? And like, yeah, these are the people I know. I interview them every month. That was that added little boost that was not just, oh, yeah, you told me about it, but now you've shown me about it. And I think that's what put me over the top.
Yeah, that's huge. And so we see this over time. I've read this in books. I've done this myself. I've had people do this with me as well, that if you put your time into something, right, you're not looking to be hired into a new space per se. You're simply offering to help or give back. And suddenly you're connected with the people who are running things, right? And that almost volunteerism ends up being more of an internship, ends up being a wonderful way to connect with and get to know your ideal clients, your next employer, your new business partners, and so on, simply by being there.
I would put 3 guardrails around that. First of all, amen, right? You're absolutely right. The best, like even when you're like thinking, I'm going to maybe work with this guy as a co-founder, just find a way to work with them for a month and you learn a lot about the person. Well, you want to put three kind of guardrails around it. Number one is, are you doing something that's meaningful enough that you'll get to know each other, right? You can go and you can you could pack stuff at soup kitchens and that's great and you'll get to know you socially, but that's going to be less efficient per time put in than something that's actually related to what you do. Right, so you pick something that's a little bit more meaningful. And number 2, you want to kind of time box it so it's manageable. And you want to make sure your return on investment of time is worthwhile because you only do so many of them. Right, so that's what I would just say around it. And then the last thing is, except there were 3, is think of it like you're allocating that time top down to it. If it's something that you do in your spare time, it'll always get lost. But if it's like, yeah, I'm blocking X% of my month to do this, and I'm going to find, if I don't have anything to do, I got to find something to do that checks this box. That's the way you make sure it gets done. And that was my critical mistake the first time around.
Are you enjoying this episode? Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. That'll help you get more episodes automatically as soon as they come out. So hit that subscribe button right now. And if you have a minute, leave a quick rating and review. That helps support the show. And by agreeing to do a column, it was beyond just a one-time thing. You now are putting this recurring time commitment on your calendar. But clearly that was hugely beneficial for you and got to the point where you were involved in the accelerating venture space. So when you and I have talked about this before, you told me how you reached this point where your program was globally ranked in the top 5, but somehow you felt there was this plateau. Like, what was that stuck phase like where you felt like you weren't able to get beyond that top 5 spot?
Little background, the company was called Dream It Ventures. It was founded in 2008, which made it the 3rd oldest accelerator in the world after Techstars and Y Combinator. And for the first couple of years, right, there weren't a lot of games in town. It had a great reputation. If you were a good founder or a great founder, like you wanted to apply to like a handful of programs, and Dream It was one of them. Now, as time goes by, as with anything in the world, if something seems like a good idea and people are making money at it, other people enter the field. So what went from like a handful of programs within a decade, there were 1,000, maybe even 2,000 organizations calling themselves some variation of an accelerator or an incubator or hatchery or whatever they wanted to call themselves, of varying degrees of quality, we'll just say. But there were a lot of them. Right. And you had like, well, do I want to go to New York to be in this one, or can I stay in Cleveland and go in that one? It became a little bit certainly more crowded and certainly more noisy. Now, we were still, top 5 by any way you wanted to slice it, just by virtue of our reputation and our track record and the companies that we had already put through. And into that context, we get a new CEO. Very interesting guy. Avi Savari remains a mentor of mine to this day. Comes from the advertising world, not from the accelerator world. We have this offsite, and Avi says, hey, we're top 5 right now. What would it take for us to be number 1? And there's a little bit of an awkward silence, right? Because like we know the 2 or 3 companies that we need to unseat. And, if we do everything just right, and maybe if we could get a little bit more money behind us, because we were always kind of scrappy and underfunded, maybe we could pick off number 2. But Y Combinator, man, they're really far ahead. Like, I don't know if that lead is surmountable. And Avi says, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, I don't want to be top 5. I want to be number 1. So instead of us banging up against the ceiling and trying to unseat a company that we can't, instead of doing it the hard way, let's find an area within this kind of greater world where we can be number 1. And then that, like you said in the beginning, that put the problem on its side. Not like, how do we get better at this and try to be number 1, but like, where can we be number 1?
Yeah, that's powerful. A strategy I talk about often in the book is this idea of niching down or redefining your ideal customer profile. So you guys looked at the marketplace, realized that there are these bigger companies or bigger accelerators that were effectively outcompeting you, and it was hard to scale beyond them. So instead of trying to beat them at their own game, you redefined the market. So walk us through that. What was their definition, and then what became your definition of the marketplace?
Sure. Niching down, niching up, niching sideways. I don't know. Maybe it's niching sideways or niching downstream, maybe. Yeah, downstream. That's what I'll call it. So again, let's visualize what an accelerator meant back then. So if you close your eyes, imagine a room, 10,000 square feet. It's got like 10 to 12 tables. You got 3-4 seats around each table. Those are the founders. That's their team, right? They have come into that room and they live there for 3 months. And, around lunchtime, once or twice a week, pizza comes and a speaker comes. There may be beer. And they have a topic, a discussion about, customer discovery or, what a cap table is and what it looks like. And then every week, those teams meet with the managing director of the program to discuss progress and what they're going to do for the next week. And at the end of that 3-month period, you have this big event in a rented out space on stage. It's called Demo Day. And the companies pitch their hearts out to investors in the hopes of raising their seed round. And that was what Accelerator Incubator meant to the world in the mid-20 teens. So we're looking at this, and there was always some startups that kind of fell out of that bucket. We always had a couple of startups come and knock on our door and say, hey guys, listen, you're really good at helping startups get customers, but we've already raised a seed round. We're already doing a couple of $100,000 in revenue, $1 million in revenue. We're beyond that stage. We don't need you to tell us like, this is how, a fundraising round works. We could use that other help. What can you do for us? You can come into the program. It's like, well, yeah, but the program, that's 6 or 7% of our company. We got to give you for this. We're beyond that stage. Our board wouldn't let us do that anyway. So I said, well, I'll talk to your board. That didn't work. So we had all these later stage startups that were kind of interested in working with us, but we just couldn't. And at the same time, those corporations that we were very good at introducing to the startups, they'd come to us and say, man, Jeremy, that startup that you brought to us, that's a really cool idea, right? And that founder, super sharp, right? Great pain point, like we'd love to deal with that, but the company's only 6 months old. Like they're not far along enough for a Fortune 100 company to work with. We're going to track them for like the next 12 months. And then like, if all goes well, we're going to work with them. But keep bringing us all this cutting edge stuff. This is awesome. And like morons, we kept bringing them these cutting edge startups. And it's like, awesome, 12 months, right? But all of a sudden then it clicks, right? Avi's like, I want to find a place where we can be number 1. And then we have all these really interesting startups that were, not a right fit for our program. And all these corporates, supply, demand, sound familiar? All these corporates who wanted companies that were 12 months further along than what we were doing. So we got supply and we had demand. And the only thing that was preventing us from putting them together was A, the program we ran, and B, how we charged for it. So like, okay, F that. We'll just throw those out the window and start from scratch. But we had supply and we had demand. So we moved a little downstream to these more mature startups. And now we're bringing them to corporations like, that's awesome. Let's do a pilot. But we had to change everything about the program, right? Because, now you're with a different ICP. They're further along. They've got 20 people, not 3 people. They've got stuff going on. They can't relocate and go someplace for 3 months. So we had to change all of that, and we had to change the financial offer. But once we had that kind of change in mindset, that we weren't going to keep doing what we were doing, just try to do it a little better, a little better, a little better, and win, to like, we're going to go just a couple of feet over to the right where there's nobody in front of us. We're going to do something no one's done with unmet supply and unmet demand. All of a sudden, things became a lot easier.
So when we talked about Bunk 1 earlier, you had the market and you had the product, but the messaging needed a fix. And here, what I'm hearing is that the market was there, but the product wasn't yet a fit. And so you adjusted what your product was and then your messaging to better serve, really, at this point now, a two-sided marketplace.
Yeah. I mean, it always was, to a degree, a 2 or 3 or 4-sided marketplace, depending on, who you want to include in that story. The difference was we had it's going to sound weird. We had a beginner product. We turned it into an expert product. So it's like, you can teach people basic tennis or you can be a tennis pro. We decided, okay, there's a lot of basic tennis instructors out there. We're going to be a tennis pro.
So at this point, did you stop serving the earlier stage companies entirely and focus just on the ones further along? Or was this a new market and you kept the old one as well?
In between the two. So we had a couple of different offices at that point in time. And at that point in time, we were geographically focused. So we did the same thing in a lot of different places. But we had a program. We had one industry-focused program in health tech. And as we went later stage, if we're going to go later stage, we have to be industry-focused, because that just makes the customer introduction so much better. And if we're going to hang our hat on that, which is what later stage startups need the most, then we need to do that the best, right? So that's how our product had to evolve. But meanwhile, we had like health tech kind of working and had a great reputation. It's like, okay, we're not going to change that. But Andrew, you haven't started recruiting for the New York cohort yet, the New York, the summer program. So instead of it being a generalist early stage summer program, we're going to do kind of half and half. We're going to go into a particular industry, happen to be ed tech, because Penn State gave us a ton of money. That's a separate story. So we're going to go into ed tech. We're going to test out a new industry with this new model of later stage startups, with this new model of, we call them customer sprints, like ways to, programmatic way, meet a lot of customers. And we're going to throw this demo day out the window, right? Because that's maybe if you're a seed stage startup raising your first $1 million, 2 or 3, but doesn't really work for a Series A company. And we're going to create a whole new thing, which we call investor sprints. Like literally, like blank sheet of paper. But we're going to do that with you in what was the New York program and leave the other stuff alone to see if it works. And when it did, everything else then moved along. We moved health tech to later stage, and we span up ultimately other verticals after that.
So when you define this new avatar or ideal customer profile, and you started to niche or have specialization, right? How did that impact the quality and quantity of the startups that you guys were looking to attract?
Okay, I thought you were going to ask a different question. Is it okay if I answer that question and I promise you I answer this one? I thought you were going to say, did your message still work? Right? And it turned out our message didn't work anymore. We started going back to a similar problem that I had, at Bunk 1. We'd say, hey, we're an Accelerator XYZ. And we didn't realize was when the startups heard Accelerator, they had that mental image of everything I just described before. And like, we're past that stage. And then they stopped listening. Just like, hey, I have a website. We're good. I'm going to go get my fake peanut butter. They're like, yeah, I did that. I'm good. I'm going to get a Series A. And what we realized is we had to change how we talked about it. So number one, we could never use the word accelerator again, because that was just tainted in that, like it was irretrievably connected to early stage. So we called ourselves a scale-up program. And then even that wasn't enough. So in our little 8-second hook, it's like, we're the only scale-up program geared to startups that are beyond the accelerator stage. It's a little bit long, but then I'll be wait. They're like, wait, I'm beyond the accelerator stage. That's actually me. What does that mean? But that's really your first win. They just have to stop and ask that first question. So I had that same kind of like, okay, we have a new product. We think we have product market fit, but the marketing didn't work until we figured that out.
Nice. And what I'm hearing is in many of your companies and ventures, the focus on figuring out those first few seconds that get someone to go from walking past you to pausing, realizing that you're talking to their avatar specifically, and then looking to engage in the conversation because of that curiosity.
Your tweet level hook, right? If it's like, all I need is 5 minutes and they'll get it, like you'll never get the 5 minutes, right? You need that like 5-second or the 20-second elevator pitch. If you're lucky, you get 20 seconds. You need that to get them hooked enough that they'll listen for the next couple of minutes. Everything I've done has, you've had to get that one hook or else your foot's not in the door.
So bring us to that moment where you're at this retreat, you got this blank sheet of paper, right? And you're now able to design this completely new model that you did, right? Like, what was that moment like, having this blank slate time to figure out what you want to be? So many businesses are stuck in what they are and don't take that time to have that offsite or that retreat and redefine that. And you did. So tell us what that experience was like.
Oh, it was awesome. It's super liberating. But this depends, like your mileage may vary, right? It depends on what kind of person you are. Some people just like, okay, I got it. I'm going to execute on that. And they love it. And that's awesome. And there's no shade there. But for me, like, I love being given a blank sheet of paper. I mean, candidly, and I don't know if I ever said this publicly or not, I was actually on the verge of leaving Dream It at that point, because I had done the early stage accelerator model for 2 years. And like, there's a regular turnover in that industry at the 2 or 3 year mark. Like, I've done that. What do I do next? Do I go into like a regular VC fund? So, I had that kind of in the back of my mind. And then into that mind, all of a sudden Avi comes to me and says, listen, now that we know we're going later stage, you realize I've never done this before. I don't know how to build this, right? They're doing their thing. You used to be a consultant. I liked some of the ideas you had when we were spitballing at the retreat. Do you want to run with this? And I'm like, well, that sounds like fun. So for me, I sat down and like, you iterate on it and you come up with different ideas. You put yourself in the mind of your ICP and like, what actually do you need if you are that kind of startup? And came up with a straw man. Talked about it a bunch. Then we talked to a lot of other startups about it. Hey, we talked to you about coming to the program before. It wasn't a fit before. But if we did something like this, would this make sense to you? And like, yeah, that would have been great. Of course, now we're beyond that stage too. Sorry. But yeah, that would have been perfect for us. And we did as much of that customer discovery as we could. And then we launched that quick test that I talked about before, with just, instead of the New York office, trying it in an ed tech context.
Let's double click into that. You've shared with me before your 3x5 index card model, right? To sort of do this market research. And I'm hearing you sort of touch on that process. Tell us more about that research phase of this to validate if your idea that you put on a blank sheet was any good, if it had legs.
You refer to one of my coolest tricks, which we actually couldn't use in this case. It's the index card app, where you just sketch out your app on an index card. This is actually one of the tips I have in the book. You sketch it out on an app, you don't build anything, and then you go to your audience and you say, hey, Jeremy, here, pretend you download the app. Here's the cover, the first screen. Touch it, swipe it, do with it what you will. I just want to watch. Just verbalize what you're thinking so I know what's working, what isn't working. Super cool technique, saves you tons of time and money. You don't build what people don't use. You build what they're confused about differently. Works very well for customer-facing apps, not so much for this. So in this, we had to draw them the mental picture. Right? So first of all, you go out there and you need to find your target market and talk to as many as you can, dozens. In fact, before we even did that, when we were still figuring out, like, is this the direction we want to go at all? We talked to a couple of dozen startups and we simply asked them this question: what are the best accelerators that you know of? Okay, for each of those accelerators, what is special or unique about them? What, if you had to sum them up in one sentence. So they would say, like, Y Combinator, best network of investors out there. They would say Techstars, oh, they do great, corporate programs with like corporate sponsors, right? Dream It, oh, you guys are really good at customer, introducing us to our first pilot customers. And then as they went down that list, all of a sudden it became very vague. It's like, oh, I think they're a good program. Or, oh, they're the best program in, this city. But that was actually, pretty scary if you weren't like one of the top 5 or 6. And like people are just, hey, they're kind of a good program. Because that meant you had no real branding in the customer's market. But for us, it cemented that, if we build on customer introductions, That's building on a strength in the existing brand, which is actually one of the themes here, right? Like if you're niching down or niching sideways or, kind of sidestepping into an adjacent market, you're almost always building on something. It's never like I'm ripping this piece of paper up and starting something new. You're starting with some of the same building blocks. You're just building it differently. So it was good that we had that. We did that before we even formulated the new model. And then when we formulated the new model, then we went out and we talked to another couple of dozen startups that were in the stage that we wanted them to be in. And we said, hey, thanks for agreeing to meet with us. You can't hurt our feelings, right? If it's not for you, just tell us. You'll save us a lot of time and money if you do. By the way, it's important you do that because people don't like to tell you your baby's ugly if you don't give them permission to do that. And we just talked to them like, hey, here's how the program would look. It'd be 3 weeks. About 60% would be remote. It would be just you, maybe you and your co-founder, not your entire team. We do most of it on Zoom. There'd be 2 weeks in the middle where we bring you face-to-face in front of customers. There'd be 2 weeks in the end where we bring you face-to-face in front of investors. What do you think? Would this be worth your time and effort? And we got almost a uniformly positive experience and feedback from it. And only when we had that did we decide, okay, we're going to do this.
What I'm hearing here, and this is really powerful, is that whether you are doing market research with an app, you write in index cards, or you're creating your model and walking someone through in their mind what it is you're going to create, you're doing that research ahead of time. So often I've worked with entrepreneurs and founders, and I know you have as well, that build this and hope the market will come to them only to realize nobody wants it, right? Versus the approach you're talking about that we always encourage is shop this idea, do that research, have those customer interviews, talk to your ideal market, get those 20 to 50 conversations. That'll start to shape things. That lets you know if you've got a winner, if you are nearby that, or if you don't have a great concept yet.
Don't be afraid. People are not going to steal your ideas. If those people that you're talking to and your customers that were going to steal your ideas, they wouldn't still be working where they are.
You got the new model in place. You implement it. And now you are building this, you're running it. What kind of impact did it have niching down to that new profile and changing the offering? Like, how did that change your position in the marketplace compared to those giants you were talking about that you were previously competing against?
Oh my God, it was night and day. It's like, you come home, you take your backpack off. Like everything's just easier. Everything that was like fighting for attention, it's like you're the only guy there. You're getting more inbound because, hey, I just heard about this. They're telling me it's the only one that makes sense for me. What is this exactly? I'm like, oh yeah. Right. So everything became easier. There was no background noise. I mean, the hardest thing we were fighting with was like, are we really like different? But once we had that message down, once the word started getting out, and by the way, being within an industry helps, right? Because when you're a generalist, it's a big room. When you're a specialist, it's a smaller room. So the echoes start, they kick in a lot earlier. It becomes known, hey, you're doing ed tech. You got to talk to these guys. They're different from any other program. They're the only program that makes sense for you, Jeremy. Like when you hear that from an investor, like you take that to heart. And it wasn't perfect the first time. There were lots of things that, we learned along the way that could be better, but it was a quantum level different and better than anything else out there, which is really what you're looking for. You can always get better on top of it, but clear field in front of you, it just makes life a lot easier.
So what were some of the unexpected benefits as you guys made this pivot that you didn't plan for, didn't expect that came to be after you changed?
I'll do a little bit of math here, but I promise you it's easy math, right? So back in the early stage, we would have a cohort of about 12 startups. And we understood that about 4 of them would be dead within a year. They're just failure to launch. Another third would raise their seed round pretty quickly. And then somewhere in the middle, some guys would like linger a bit, maybe raise a little later. But that was the math we were dealing with. And then we said, well, gee, if we're going a little later, we don't need 12 startups, which is like an epic amount of work. It's like really hard those 3 months. We should, in theory, only need 8 startups because we're skipping the stage where the other 4 die. So we started recruiting for 8. But what we found was, because we had the field to ourselves, the quality of the startups, relative to their stage was even better. So to get the same startups making it to where we wanted them to be down the road, we only needed 6. We didn't need 8 because the 6 that we got were that much better. The mortality rate was that much lower. So that meant I could look at, I could work with 6 startups more intensively and get the same result that I took when I had to get 12 beforehand. And that wasn't something I expected. A very pleasant surprise.
That sounds very similar to when we are looking at a funnel in a business and we improve the quality of leads coming into it. Suddenly, our quantity of leads coming in may be lower because we're targeting better, but so many more of them come through that funnel just by narrowing that focus or adjusting the messaging and so forth. You suddenly see that your opt-in rate, your conversion rate, all those things improve dramatically. And that's sometimes, an unexpected side effect for business owners, because the initial fear is that by narrowing in or dialing our niche in, we're going to have fewer customers. The reality is you get a smaller quantity, but they're higher quality. So your throughput ends up being so much better.
I get something similar. It's not necessarily the top of the funnel, but sometimes you got to put like a qualification layer, right? You got to go to get a little deep, like sales qualified leads. If you play in enterprise sales, you have some like lower level person asking the basic qualification questions. If they don't fit, you take them out. And a lot of the entrepreneurs are like, oh my God, I just lost half my leads. And then you realize like those are garbage anyway. Now you have twice as much time to deal with the good stuff. But there is that visceral feel at first when they see the number of the top of their funnel go down.
So a lot of business owners face similar concerns that you had when you were looking at that, number 1 spot while being in that number 5 and trying to figure out like, how do I grow? Because if I'm not moving up, then we're going to face this gradual decline. So what advice would you have for business owners who are facing that same challenge you were, and they feel like there's nothing but inevitable decline ahead, and that's not what they want? What would you advise?
So it's actually a little bit more liberating to realize that you're facing inevitable decline. It's not always that obvious. Usually what I find, so the people where it's not working at all, it's going to fail, like they have no problem pivoting because it's a 0 here, let's go try something. The people who are in the situation you just described, where they've got something, but they really appreciate in their gut that the shelf life is limited. Like they also get it. They may not know what to do next, and they're a little hesitant, how fast do I do it or not? But they realize that to a certain extent they're on borrowed time, and whatever they can get from the old platform is a gift from God while they try to figure out where they want to be next. The most resistance I get are from people who aren't quite there yet, and who are still thinking, I might yet be able to be number 1. Or like, I haven't quite broke through. I haven't quite got that message right yet. I got some sales, but it's harder, but I'm so close, right? I'm so close. And they keep at it. And sometimes legit, they're very close and they need to break through. But a lot of times, like that feeling of being so close is masking the fact that you just don't have the fit that you need. You're not going to get there. And those are the hardest ones. Those are the ones that cling to their old model the longest. So my advice would be, if you feel like it's just harder than it should be, right? It's going to be hard, but it's just harder than it should be. If you feel like you're scraping for every inch rather than making like big jumps, take a look in the mirror and ask yourself, is this ever going to break through, right? And one of the ways to think about it is, when I started this X years ago, I had a list of like 10 things that I thought were going to make it work. And naturally, I ranked them from most likely to least likely. Now it's X years later. I've gone through most of the items on that list. Do I need to go to like item number 8 or 9? I mean, if I thought 3 years ago that those were unlikely, the other ones were going to work, now really I'm praying for a miracle. At what point do I say these are like so unlikely that my time is best spent just doing something totally different? And if you can get to that point, then you're like, okay, then you're in that liberating moment where it's like, I feel like I can do something else.
When you were sharing about that sort of middle space, it reminds me very much of good to great, and how there's this idea of good is the enemy of great. In business, when we have an idea that just does not work, that's almost better than something that kind of works, that you've got to work really, really hard at, and you're sort of forcing that boulder uphill. It's almost easier when it doesn't budge and you can move on, because then you can find that boulder that moves easily, as opposed to just struggling against the thing that kind of, sort of, a little bit works.
When you do, you're like, oh my God, why didn't I do this a year ago?
Yeah. Because when you got a winner, it's great. When something just sells easy and you got that demand early on and you know your message is resonating, that's wonderful, right? We love those businesses, but it's those middle ones that can be really tough. So love that. All right. So looking back at that blank sheet moment, knowing what you know now, is there anything you would have done differently when you started to redesign the product portfolio with that blank sheet?
That's a really good question. No. Right. So let me qualify that. No, like obviously hindsight's 2020. I could have gotten to version 2.5 of it a lot faster if I just knew what worked. But, realistically, there's nothing where I look back at it and I'm like, you know what? Really, had I thought about it a little bit better, I probably should have done this instead of that earlier. Right. Those are the ones where you really knowing then what I knew now, I would have done it differently. That's where you realize that it wasn't optimal. The analogy I sometimes use is if you play blackjack, the phrase always split aces and eights, right? That's always if you're dealt 2 eights, you can split them. And, since you're more likely to get a picture card, you're going to get an 18, which is a good hand in each. So it's always the odds on favor to bet. Occasionally the dealer will win anyway, but it's the right strategy, regardless of what might happen on, a couple of the odd exceptions. So I feel like in this case, we had the right strategy. We executed through it. There weren't any obvious stuff that I would have done differently without the magic of hindsight. Where I might have personally done something a little differently, and kind of shame on me because it's a kind of an echo of the mistake I made at Bunk One, is I probably should have been out there creating optionality while I was at Dream It a little earlier. Right. I was so excited about building something new. Could I have been allocating a little bit more time to, say, talking with people who could have been investors in a separate fund? I probably should have been doing that a bit more while I was at Dream It, but I felt like I had a path to the fund. So, shame on me. I made the same version of a mistake twice.
And now we know. That is that hindsight. Now, you've taken a lot of your advice and your experience, and you've shared that in the classroom and out in the world, including you recently published a book, The Entrepreneur's Odyssey. Tell us about your recently published book.
You mean this thing?
Yeah, I do.
Shocking how I had that right at hand, right? So thanks for asking. So, I tell people I've worked with or I've looked at over 10,000 startups, and they just assume that I'm exaggerating. But I have to tell you, remember the original model when you wanted 12 startups? I looked at 1,000 startups a year to get to those 12. And I looked at them in about 2 months because that's how we had application period. So I have literally looked at well over 10,000 startups in the past 2 decades. I've invested in about 72, 73 of them. And I've worked with a couple of hundred more founders in fairly deep levels of detail. And I've learned a couple of things. Number one, I've learned, kind of who's coachable and who isn't. That's kind of a major thing that a lot of investors learn. Don't waste your time on people who are not coachable. But once you're dealing with a smart, coachable founder, there are good and there are great ways to give advice. A good way to give advice is to say, hey, Jeremy, listen, I've seen this before. I think you need to do A, B, and C, and here's why. I've given you my reasons. The great way is actually to tell a story. So, hey, Jeremy, listen, you got a freemium business model. That's awesome. I love that model. I actually, or my colleagues actually worked with this other company, similar freemium model in a different space. They had the same concern that you had. Am I going to get that 2% conversion that makes the business work or not? They were going to just keep building. And then, they'd be done a few weeks before demo day. They'd roll it out and then they'd present the results on demo day. But we said, hey guys, what happens if they're not good results? And they're like, oh yeah, that would be a problem. So what we decided to do with them is we say, hey, we're just going to put up that buy now page, right? You know what you've built, you know what you want to build. Put the buy now button. Your audience doesn't know that you haven't built that yet. And if they click it, you say coming soon. But at least you have great data, right? You'll know what your conversion rate's likely to be. And in fact, the company I was telling this exact story to, they went so far as to take the credit card. They didn't have a merchant account. The credit card never left the customer's computer, and they got a pop-up window. Hey, congrats, 3 months free, Jeremy. But they wanted that test to be as close to reality in their customers' eyes as possible because they wanted the data to be clear. Now, the company I'm telling the story about, they actually came back from their test a week later and they were screwed, right? Their conversion rate was nowhere near where they needed it to be. So in the middle of that accelerator program, they said, listen, we're scrapping it all. There's this one very small topic within the site that we built that people really like. We're going to build a totally separate startup around just that, around, hey, where should I sit in a concert or in a sports stadium for the best view, the best bang for my buck? And that company is now a billion-dollar company called SeatGeek. So that version of the advice, I gave the exact same advice. I took 3 times as long, granted, but whenever I would give the advice in the form of a story from a different startup that was going through something similar, I could see the person I'm talking to identify. I could see them getting drawn and I could see them seeing themselves in the situation. It gave them permission to admit that it might not turn out exactly the way they think it is. Great companies experiment too. So they identified with the stories and they took that advice so much more readily than when it was just, hey, me telling them this and maybe some other smart people think I'm telling them something else. So when the time came in my career where I was like, yeah, I really want to write this up. Well, then I had no time. But when the time came in my career later where I had a little bit of time, I said, if I ever write this book, it's not going to be a how-to guide. It's going to be a novel about a fictional startup from everything from an idea all the way through to funding. And that's how I'm going to embed all the stories and all the advice within that narrative arc.
A lot of my favorite books, even in the world of business, follow that same model, right? So if you look at The Goal or The E-Myth Revisited or any of these different books, they are written as a parable, right? You're following your hero's journey that is chock full of valuable business information, but it's a wonderful story. And from the first sentence of your book, I was hooked wanting to know more. And I felt myself right in that room at that pitch competition that our protagonist is going through. So I really enjoyed that read and love that you have taken that wisdom and made it such a consumable format and not a dry academic book, even though you're using this book in the classroom at universities. So that's really well done.
This is where I promised to your audience that this didn't actually come up in our pre-call. I read The Goal in business school. In the back of my mind, that was always the inspiration for it. I used to talk about the entrepreneur as the goal for startups, but not enough of the younger generation entrepreneurs knew it. So now I just call it Lean Startup meets The Alchemist. And I'm like, oh, I got it. But funny story, I'm pitching this to publishers and agents. I finally get connected with my publisher and I'm like, yeah, it's written like a novel, but it's really a textbook. I'm like, oh, it's a business fable. I hadn't heard that before, but that's what it's called. It's a business fable. We really like business fables. We published The Goal.
No way.
So my publisher is the publisher of The Goal in Europe. And the book was based on The Goal. And you came up with that totally independently. So,
The Goal is one of those works, whenever I'm working with clients and we're optimizing funnels, I'm just applying Goldratt's theory of constraints, TOC, iteratively again and again and again on the funnel. And so that's why it's such a valuable read that I recommend to so many business owners. So for our listeners, that's The Goal by Elliot Goldratt. And of course, we are also talking with Andrew about his book, The Entrepreneur's Odyssey. So to recap for our listeners, you moved from a prestigious but stalled position in a crowded global market to a bold strategic pivot where you moved your services upstream, allowing you to dominate a new category and be number one. And then you built out successful specialized verticals.
Exactly.
So Andrew, for our listeners who want to learn more about you, where should they go right now?
Well, you got 2 or 3 options, and it depends on how tired you are of hearing my voice. If you're like, okay, I'm done with that, but the book's kind of interesting, just go to Amazon. It's The Entrepreneur's Odyssey. I don't think there's any other book by that name. Certainly not, by Andrew Ackerman. Do that. That's fine. God bless you. I hope you love it. Let me know if you do. If you're like, well, okay, I'm kind of curious. I want to learn a little bit more. You can go to my website. It's Andrew, the letter B as in boy, Ackerman, B is my middle initial, .com. There's a little bit more about me and, of course, links to buy the book if you decide to do that. If you're a professor of entrepreneurship like I am in my spare time, check it out. I have some teaching notes about how I use the book in my classroom. So that's all there. And if you're like, no, man, I really want to learn more about this dude, check me out on LinkedIn. It's got my whole history there. If you want to reach out to me, you can message me through LinkedIn. Just don't reach out blindly to connect. I use LinkedIn for warm connections, so I only connect with people I know. But you can send me a message through LinkedIn, and I will respond to them all, if they're even remotely relevant.
Love it. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us, and congrats again on the book, as well as the great pivots and the great growth. This has been so fun chatting with you, as always. And for our listeners, if you want to find out more about Andrew, you got the links right there. They'll be in the show notes as well. You can find him at andrewbackerman.com. You can find him on LinkedIn, and you can find his book on Amazon. Andrew, thanks again so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. Quick reminder, hit that subscribe button right now so you can get more episodes when they come out automatically. And remember to leave that rating and review right now.